Hello and welcome back to the Architectury Multiplatform Modding in Minecraft series, and today we are going to talk about recipes. Now, the difference between what we've done so far and recipes is that recipes don't require any mod loader code, so they also don't require any architecture code, because since quite a few versions of Minecraft now, you can add recipes simply through a Datapack. And in Minecraft, a mod is essentially two parts. One part is what is in-game, so all the custom stuff like blocks and items, and another part is simply a data pack that's loaded through the mod. And in this data pack of our mod, we can add our custom recipes. And in this episode, I'm going to show you how to add crafting recipes, both shaped and shapeless, as well as smelting and the special recipe type of blasting. But there are many other recipe types, and I'll show you how to find more information on how to add those to the game. So to actually be able to show you how to create a smelting recipe, I've added two new items and blocks to the game, a ruby ore and a deep slate ruby ore, which we will use for those recipes. Those are simply as I've done with the other two items and I've done so far. Also just recolored diamond ore blocks, and we'll use them in this episode for the furnace recipes and the blasting recipes. Adding those is essentially the same thing I did with the ruby blocks, so I won't go into detail on how to do this. But now we want to add a crafting recipe, and for this we're going to our resources folder and going to create a new directory, and in this time we call it data, and then our mod ID tutorial_mod, and then recipe. And in this directory, we can now create our custom recipes. So I've already prepared the corresponding files because it's a lot of typing work. And so I'm just going to explain what the content of these files means. So let's start with the most simple type, a shaped crafting recipe. This is the shaped crafting recipe for our Ruby block. So the first thing in such a recipe block is that we define a type, and the type of a shaped recipe is Minecraft:crafting_shaped. The next thing a shaped recipe needs is the pattern. So the pattern essentially, just think of this as your crafting grid. You can use a 3x3 grid like in this example, but you could also do a 2x2 grid, for example, or any other shape as long as it's at a maximum 3x3. And you can put any character you want in this grid, but I recommend using something that is at least closely related to the item you want to actually be there. If you want nothing to be there, you can simply put in a space. So if, for example, you wanted a Ruby block where the top left corner needs to be left empty, you'll simply replace the top left R with a space. But we don't want to do this, so I'll add it back in. Next, you need to define the key for this pattern. So essentially the key is just a mapping of the character you put up here to an item ID that is supposed to be there. You can also use tags if you want, for example, any log block, but tags I'm going to explain in the next episode, so for now we stick with just regular items here. So in our case, we want this R to be a tutorial_mod:ruby item. And the last part we need is the result of our recipe. And the result consists of two parts that are mandatory. The first one is the ID of the output item. So in our case, tutorial_mod Ruby block. And the count, how many of this item you want to get when you craft this recipe. In our case, just one. That's everything that is necessary for a shaped recipe. But again, I'll show you later, if you want to add optional things to this, how to find the information on what you need there. Next, let's talk about shapeless recipes. As you can see, slightly different. The first line now indicates that it's a crafting_shapeless recipe. And our pattern block is now replaced with the ingredients block, which is simply a JSON array of all the items you need in the crafting grid for this recipe to work. In our case, just one Ruby block, but if you wanted to add a diamond as well, you could go into the next line and add a Minecraft:diamond, and then you would need a Ruby block and a diamond to craft this recipe. And below that, again, a result block, and this is exactly similar to the shaped recipe, so we want a tutorial underscore mod Ruby item as our ID, as our result, and we want 9 of that. Yeah, that's it with shapeless and shaped crafting. Now let's talk about smelting, and for this we'll look at the Ruby ore smelting recipe. Now a smelting recipe is of the type Minecraft smelting. Smelting refers to the furnace, and again we need to specify the ingredient, but this time we only have one ingredient because the furnace only has one input slot, and in our case that's the Ruby ore. And then again a result block, but this time we don't need to give a count because smelting always returns just one item. So in our case our result is simply the ID tutorial underscore mod :Ruby. What's different between smelting and the crafting we've seen so far is that smelting we can also specify experience. This is the amount of experience points you'll get when you smelt this recipe and then collect the output item from the furnace. So in this case 0.15 experience points. And the last line is the cooking time. This is essentially the duration in ticks that the item needs from starting to smelt to being fully smelt. And 200 ticks, 10 seconds, is the default value for the furnace. So every vanilla recipe has a cooking time of 200 ticks. So we'll do this for our Ruby ore as well. Similar for the deep slate, it's just a different ingredient, so I won't go into detail about this. And the last thing is the more special type of recipes, for example blasting, and essentially as you can see for blasting, it's pretty much exactly like the furnace recipe, so the regular Minecraft smelting recipe, but just the type is now blasting, so that means that this recipe is done in the blast furnace and not in a regular furnace. And the other difference in this recipe file is that I will change the cooking time to 100 ticks, because that's the regular cooking time for a blast furnace recipe. 100 ticks, it's half of the regular furnace. And again, for the deep slate Ruby ore, it's exactly the same, just with another ingredient. So with that, these recipes should appear in game and should work in game. We'll test that shortly, but before that I want to show you where to find all the information about these recipes, and that's the Minecraft Wiki, because there's this Minecraft Wiki page which details the content of the files for all the different recipe types. So you can see, for example, if you want a decorated pot crafting recipe, you could jump to this point, and here you see what the contents of the file would need to be. Or for example, smithing recipe down here, or smoking recipe down here. And this page, I'll have that linked below, you can find all the information about all the different recipe types that exist in the game. But with that out of the way, let's see if our recipes actually work in game. So let's start the game and try to craft something. So welcome to the crafting corner, and the first thing we want to do, as you see, I have Ruby ore and deep slate Ruby ore in my inventory. By the way, just regular blocks as with the regular Ruby block here. So let's try and smelt the Ruby ore. And as you can see, it starts smelting, and put in the deep slate Ruby ore as well in the blast furnace. And now, as you can see, the Ruby ore smelts and we get a ruby. And the blast furnace, as you can see, is slightly faster. Here we have now 5 remaining. Here we are at now 6. So yeah, you see our smelting recipes worked. Let's see if our crafting worked. So let's try to make this ruby block into a ruby. And as you can see, no matter where I place it in the crafting grid, we always get the 9 rubies. And if we craft the rubies back, we get a ruby block back. So with that, as you can see, the crafting works, at least in Fabric, but just for the sake of it, I'm also going to show it in NeoForge, but as it's just a data pack, it's vanilla behavior, so nothing should be different there. And as you can see, we're now in NeoForge, and our Ruby ore is smelting in the furnace, and our deep slate Ruby ore is smelting in the blast furnace, and we can also craft a ruby block into rubies, and a rubies back into a ruby block. With that out of the way, you now know how to add recipes to the game, and in the next episode, I'm going to show you how to add block drops, because right now if you would break one of our blocks, they would just disappear and not drop anything. And I'll also explain a bit more about tags so that we can actually require, for example, a stone pickaxe for a Ruby block or for ore if we want to break it. So in the next episode, block drops and tags. See you then. Goodbye.